explain some of your background before we get going?
Sure. So as Mal said, my name is Nate Hurst, and November of 2011, I hired out with the Springfield Terminal Railway. And for those of you that do not know, the Springfield Terminal was the operating subsidiary of Pan Am Railways. So every check I got, Springfield Terminal up in the corner. And when I hired out, I started in District 1, which was the old Maine Central. Then worked my way west, District 2, Rigby, out to Willows East and Littleton. And then on to District 3, which was the WNP, and then the Pan Am Southern Territory. So Littleton, west of Mechanicville, the Rotterdam branch, Con River, and the Waterbury. And 2014, I was promoted to Director of Train Operations. That was Pan Am's fancy title for Chief Train Dispatcher, where I oversaw the railroad in 12-hour increments, usually at night. And then in 2016, July of 2016, I left Pan Am to be where I currently am at Keolis, dispatching their north side lines out of Cobble Hill and Somerville. And soon, hopefully, back in Billerica. They've built us a new facility, and I can't wait to get back to that Billerica commute that I had all those years. So the pictures that I've taken over the years, obviously, were not while I was on duty, but obviously when you're working whatever shift, we call them tricks on the railroad, you have inside knowledge. You work a first shift, you get out at 3 p.m., you know what's going on. On my way home, I'd take pictures, or work a third trick on your way home. Go out and take some shots. Maybe you go home and take a nap, and then you call the railroad. When you wake up after 3 hours, and hey, where's this train? So I tried to try to get what I could when I was there. We'll start the shot that's been up here for a little while. Is the 3rd unit grain train from Horizon Milling, seen heading west past Wachusett in West Fitchburg. A couple of Ferromex units and a couple of Pan Am units, leading 110 empties west. Horizon Milling and Air, late 2010, early 2011, put in some capital to expand the facility in Air, where before they put the money in, they were probably getting 10 to 40 carloads of wheat in a given week. And after they put the money in, not just getting more cars coming in via manifest, but they were also had the ability to get 2 to 3 100+ grain trains in a month. And the grain that they get, usually off the BNSF in North Dakota, like this one here, occasionally off of the UP. So again, here's the train headed west, Wachusett, 110 empties, headed back to Rotterdam, where they would be handed to CSX, who would then bring it to Chicago and hand it off to the BNSF. Next, Otter River in Templeton, local FI1. Just finished working Seaman paper. And Seaman paper, they get loads of scrap paper. They produce tissue paper, but not Kleenex tissue. The best way to describe it would be, when you go and buy a new pair of shoes, the paper that's in the box and in the sole of the shoes. That's the kind of tissue that the paper that they produce.
This is the Fitchburg Main line.
Yes, Otter River, yes.
Dave, did you say 300 cars, 300 trains a month for that Verizon grain?
No, 2 to 3 unit trains a month. About 110 cars per train. Westbound, probably sit down here. Westbound POED, coming up, seen from Salem Street, coming up through Andover Street interlocking in Lawrence. Now, when most people think of dispatching, they somewhat rightfully think, sitting behind a desk with a computer screen, clicking buttons, documenting trains on a train sheet, which is a federal document. We have to record our names and trains and et cetera, track car movements. But one thing that railroads do for dispatchers is give them road days. And Pan Am gave me a week's worth of road days to start and learn my District 1 territory. And it certainly gives you a different aspect from sitting behind a desk to going out and seeing, you're dealing with something physical, you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with the traveling public. So the first trip I had, my mother dropped me off at the Lowell station, took a trip into Boston, and took an Amtrak down Easter up to Portland. It was the night of January 28th, 2012. And that night I spent the night in Portland. And the following morning, it was a Sunday morning, I reported to Rigby for 0900 to ride PORU, Portland to Rumford. And I rode PORU up to Riley's Yard in Maine. When I arrived at Riley's, called the office and said, all right, now what? And the dispatcher said, Nate, we're going to give you two options. You can either wait a couple hours for the night crew to bring that train you just got off of to go up to Rumford and back. Or you can ride with the RI2 crew and do some switching in the yard while we get a taxi to you to bring you to Waterville. And I chose option 2. So here's our power, RI2's power up at Riley's in Maine. For those of you that haven't heard the news, at this particular time, Riley's was owned by Verso Paper. Verso sold it to Pixel Solutions, Pixel Specialty Solutions, a couple of years ago. And during the pandemic, they had an explosion up at the paper mill, and they never really got back on their feet afterwards. And so the beginning of last month was they produced their last paper. So now the mill is, it's not producing any paper, and what's left of the paper is being hauled out by train. And, who knows what's going to happen to the mill? Hopefully somebody will be able to take it. But this is the PORU I had come up with, a classic lineup of Guilford power. Only 4 axles were allowed on the Rumford branch. So the following day, I woke up at the Waterville Grand Hotel, called my boss, and he said, that's what the crews called it, the Waterville Grand Hotel. I think it was a Fairfield. Called my boss and called my boss, and he said, well, the superintendent's going to pick you up, bring you to Hinckley. You're going to ride the Sappy job down. And rode the Sappy job down from Hinckley, got off the train at Waterville. Called my boss back up and said, now what? And he said, keep your vest on. I want you to walk around Waterville Yard, get a sense for what we do there, get a sense for the physical the physical characteristics up there. Make sure you visit the mechanical department. They're gonna have a tour for you in the roundhouse. It's all right. But also keep in mind too, even though I did have my camera on this trip, I'm not there to rail fan. I'm not there to buff. I'm there to learn how I can do my job. I'm just starting out on the railroad, and I didn't want my fellow new coworkers to see me as a fan. I wanted them to see me first and foremost as a new coworker that was interested in learning how to do the job. So here we are at Waterville, Pan Am's lone SW1, 007, must have been a James Bond fan who numbered it. Pan Am had gotten in 2008, 2009, they bought 2 former Berlin Mills SW1s, and they quickly flipped one to Larry's Truck and Electric out in Ohio, and they kept the second one as the Waterville House Switcher. So it never went out on the road. It was just used by the mechanical department to move power in and out. And then the Waterville engine pit, some power waiting for their next for the next assignment.
Were these taken on that trip, or were they taken?
Yes. Yep. These are taken on the road trip when I was up there. Yep.
That was midwinter.
Oh yeah. This would have been January 30th, 2012. And of course, you go up to Waterville. Who knows what the hell you're going to find up there? Of course, you got the Waterville deadline. And one thing Guilford Pan Am was famous for really was, never mind buying new, they bought secondhand, and they really made it work for using other power that didn't work very well, that couldn't be saved, and they'd siphon parts from that and save use it on another engine. And continuing on the walk, found a Maine Central scale test car in the yard. Not something you see on the railroads in the U.S. much today. Who knows what CSX has done with it? I'm sure they didn't need it.
They haven't offered it to us yet, though. At least not that I'm aware of.
Or the Maine Central.
Yeah.
Rail fans love all seeing the different paint schemes that the Class 1s and some of the Class 2s have done, the heritage paint schemes. And when the Class 1s and Class 2s did it, they were brand spanking new engines, fresh out of the shop, a couple of days old, looking great. Well, Pan Am decided to jump on the heritage train, if you will, and they painted up 2 former B&M GP9s, 50 plus years old. One was in a former B&M maroon and gold scheme, and the other one seen here in a former Maine Central scheme. This is in the back shop in Waterville. And you got another GP9 behind it, number 71. Now this day in Waterville, I arrived early so I could not just take these pictures, but I had to get taxied up to Bucksport. Arrived there before the crew and decided to take my Olympus point and shoot camera and snap a couple of pictures just to remember that I was there. So here's our power for BKWA, Bucksport to Waterville. Behind me is where the yard office was, and behind the train is Champion Paper, which they went out of business. Not Champion Paper, but they shut down Bucksport here a couple of years ago. And I know the railroad was actively looking to see if there was any business that would be interested in coming in, and they never found one. But out of all the lines I've ridden in New England, I'll say the Bucksport branch was probably the most scenic, riding along the Penobscot River. Absolutely gorgeous territory. And back at Waterville, the following day, they added the Springfield Terminal GP945 to the array of power out in the back alley.
It's interesting, it's got a line through the unit number.
Right, white lined. By the time I hired out, really the only GP9s, Carl, that were left in any serviceable condition were the two that they painted up in the Heritage Scheme, the 52 and the 77. And
You said this was added. Is this being hauled dead and towed to be scrapped?
I'm gonna presume. I mean, the 52 was. They continued to use the 52. When they added it, I don't know. You know, I'm sure they switched around power and you know, used it for whatever the mechanical department needed for parts or whatever. And the Maine Central, former Maine Central GP 40, the 308. Back in this neck of the woods, this is westbound POSE, which was Portland to Selkirk, on its last leg of its trip to Worcester, passing the Wachusett Reservoir in Oakdale. A couple CSX units. And the third unit there is the Maine Central 619, which was along for the ride to go and pay off horsepower hours to CSX. It's not cheap to use Class 1 power. And instead of writing the Class 1 a check for using their power, Guilford would send power to go run it off horsepower hours that they used from CSX. And the opposite of POSE, the counterpart, yeah, was SEPO, Selkirk to Portland, coming through Andover, passing the former B&M station. And another POSE, westbound at Ward Hill in Haverhill. And just like the 619 and the prior POSE photo, got the Maine Central 602, another one that would be headed off to CSX to pay off horsepower hours. Now, what I always found amazing about working for the railroad was the non-railroad information you could learn just from working for the railroad. And starting in 1998, Guinness hired Moosehead Brewing Company out of St. John, New Brunswick, as a contract brewer to brew Guinness for the North American market. And Moosehead would brew Guinness up in St. John, and then they'd ship it out by rail. And part of its routing was St. John to Mattawamkeag on the NBSR. They handed over to Pan Am. That would run at Mattawamkeag to Barber and Worcester to CSX, and then to wherever else it was going. Waybills, saw waybills of these going to the greater New York metropolitan area, New Jersey, Savannah, Georgia, Houston, Texas, greater LA area. But sadly, Guinness, I mean, it's not exactly cheap to contract it out, and Guinness ended up building a brewery in Baltimore in 2015. So they now brew their own beer in North America. So this traffic has since dried up on this, at least this railroad.
Nate, are those 50-foot or 60-foot cars?
I honestly don't know. I mean, they would, you know, obviously these two here, former Fruit Growers Express CSX cars. There were some that were in Cryotran reefers, the cream and orange painted.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Now, you could be having the best day as a train dispatcher, sitting at your desk, maybe your feet might be up. Your railroad is running as smoothly as possible. And then you hear 3 words come over the radio that change your shift. Does anybody want to guess what those 3 words might be? No, before on the ground. Yeah. Emergency, emergency, emergency. And you're thinking, what the hell? And this POSE went into emergency here at Ward Hill. But emergency a railroad emergency doesn't necessarily mean what most humans would think emergency means. There's generally 2 types. There's a initiated emergency brake application. That's when the locomotive engineer dumps it. Trespasser on the tracks, maybe a suicidal individual, maybe a car stuck on the tracks, something. Or then there's an uninitiated emergency brake application. And that's when the engineer the train's going along, and then, psh, you hear the air dump. Not the engineer's fault. Actually, maybe could be. But it could be a drawbar. It could be, air hoses coming apart. It could be an air hose tearing. You think about these freight cars and how long territories that they run. A low-hanging hose, after a while, hitting the asphalt on one too many crossings, it's gonna cause a tear. And that's what happened to this POSE. Broken hose. And here we have, this is Amtrak's 696, Boston bound down Easter, gingerly moving past the POSE. When you have a train in double track territory that goes into emergency, as a dispatcher, you have to protect the other track, because trains going into emergency can cause a derailment. You don't know if maybe a tilted load, cars on the ground, whatever. Now, fixing a torn hose is pretty simple out on the road. All you need is a wrench and a conductor go to the head locomotive and get the lead hose and walk back and change out the good hose for the bad hose. And you do a brake test real quick, and then you're on your way. Well, the only problem was that this POSE, the CSX power, didn't have a wrench. So, but one thing that dispatchers rely on is other train crews. And this day out of Rigby had POSE, and not far behind it they ran a POED out of Rigby. And it's, you count on other trains to hear what's going on because they might be able to assist. And when they found out that POSE did not have a wrench, they began looking in their own power for a wrench, and they found one. And so they left, POED left their train back at Haverhill, and this is them running light past the POSE at Ward Hill to assist the POSE to fix their hose. A little bit of commuter territory, inbound Eastern Route job, seen here from March Street Overhead Bridge in Salem, and trains just clearing Beverly Draw. And point your attention to the control car, the 1512, one of the MBB coaches. Even at this time, it was relatively unique to see an MBB coach leading a commuter set. And even now, I saw a lineup the other day. The north side runs on 26 sets. 3 of them were MBB cars. Not something you generally see. And I know engineers hate them. on most control cars, you got the controls and the radio is right next to you. On the MBB coaches, you got the controls and to talk on the radio, you got to turn around. Kind of different. But. An NBSR outbound at the Willows. At this time, well, a few years before this picture, obviously we had the Obama stimulus package, and the Commonwealth got billions of dollars from that, and they used billions of dollars from it to upgrade parts of their commuter rail lines, and the Fitchburg route was probably the largest beneficiary of it, where they upgraded they upgraded the signal system between Swift, which is just outside of Boston, to Martin Street in South Acton, and then double tracking Martin Street in South Acton to Willows. So you can see the new double track being laid and the new cantilever signals being put in. Now, when Pan Am Southern came to fruition, the joint ownership of Norfolk Southern and Pan Am of Littleton, East Littleton, West, Norfolk Southern would send their geometry train up once a year to test track geometry. And at the time, Norfolk Southern had the contract for the Bow Power Plant to haul coal. And they would send their geometry train up to Bow as well. So this is the NSGO train heading west on the Stony Brook, crossing the Fletcher's Bridge over the Stony Brook in Westford. And myself dispatching District 1. In front of us here is the train sheet. Pan Am used, what I loved about Pan Am was it was really old school. Currently at Keolis we have a paper train sheet, but we only use it to write track cars, movements, and other noteworthy things that happen on the railroad. Most larger railroads have the latest technology and they document train movements electronically. At Pan Am, you had to, every time a train went through an interlocking or a point of interest on the railroad, you had to physically write the time on the train sheet. You had to put the crew, last name of the conductor and engineer, on duty time, power, loads, empties, tonnage, as well as track car information. And the train sheets, they were probably 5-6 feet long. They were big pieces of paper. So back in, this is again 2012, Global Partners, which is a energy firm headquartered here in Waltham. They have a facility in Revere, and they were looking to haul unit trains of ethanol from the US Midwest to Revere, and they were going to blend the ethanol with gasoline. And as part of them looking to do that, Pan Am ran their office car train from Air to Revere with executives of Pan Am and Global. And they went the Fitchburg route, Air, down to Swift, out at FX, over outside of BET, and over to Revere, where the executives got off. I believe they walked into where the Global facility is, right along the old East Boston branch. And the office car train was pulled back to Boston, and then it deadheaded back to Waterville via the New Hampshire route. So here we are in Somerville at Mystic Junction, city of the Boston skyline in the background, with the office car train heading back to Waterville. And as we probably all know, the ethanol trains did not happen. The state legislature put in the budget, they put in an amendment that if Global went through to do this, they would not receive Chapter 91 funding. And they didn't want to take that risk, so they pulled the plug. One of the many aspects of dispatching is the train dispatch or transfer. So it's when the relieving dispatcher transfers what's going on the railroad to the incoming dispatcher. And you talk about things that are currently relevant: crossings out of service, tracks out of service, crew and train information, pickups, set-offs, but also talk about stuff that could happen, that will happen, or plans to happen in the future. And I came in on a Friday night to relieve Gary Muncie on District 1, and part of his transfer was yarding instructions for a loaded crude oil train in Waterville. And the J.D. Irving Refinery in St. John, New Brunswick, had recently done some upgrades to its facility and started to get crude oil from the Bakken Range, North Dakota. And even though it was a relatively odd routing, some of those trains came off the BNSF to Chicago, to CSX, to Rotterdam Junction, and then Pan Am Railways to Mattawamkeag, and then on to the NBSR. So here is the first unit crude train coming through Frost and Lawrence, and I have the train list here. This train was 104 loads, 0 empties, 6251 on the footage, and 13,300 tons. So 103 loads of crude and 1 load of sand as a spacer. The load of sand is up front. Yes, it is a requirement. Yep. Now some days you would get off of work and there would be oil trains to go and photograph. Other days it was just a tied down EDPO at the Lowell Tower. So here we have an EDPO waiting for a night crew to take it east from Lowell. This is May 29th of 2012.
What's the purpose of that sand spacer?
I think it's crew safety.
Yeah, crew safety. I mean, obviously, you know, if you have God forbid, something explodes, you know, it doesn't affect the crew. Obviously, it would probably help having sand in a fire, maybe to put out the fire. God forbid anything like that happened.
What is that lead locomotive?
Pan Am had bought, before I hired out, they bought a number of SD40-2s from the KCS. And some of them showed up wearing a former Trona Railways paint scheme. So even though it looks Trona, it says MEC 618 on the side. Back to Westford, you see a Worcester-based crew pulling up to Westford for a recrew with a loaded rail train. One of the many things that was going on in 2012 was the extension of the Amtrak down easter to Brunswick. This Worcester-based crew got this train out of Deerfield and brought it up to Westford. And 1 NS unit, and the train was 31 loads, 0 empties, 2,642 tons and a train length of 1,650 feet. You know, people might, well, what does train length matter? Train length absolutely matters when you're dispatching. You don't ever want to make the mistake of not knowing or over-guessing or underestimating your train length, because you could severely destroy your railroad.
Can you give an example?
I don't remember, but there was somebody that when I was working there that was going to meet 2 trains in North Adams, and North Adams I think was about 7,000 feet. So only one train could be over 7,000 feet. The other train had to be less than that. But both trains were over 7,000 feet. So one train had to shove all the way back, I believe, to Hoosick Junction in New York. Oops.
Through the Hoosick Tunnel?
No, this was, no. Yeah. So you could really ruin your railroad if you didn't understand your footage correctly. Now, some nights working third trick, I'd come off, and like this particular night, and I'd have all the adrenaline in the world, and decided to chase this rail extra with this new fresh crew out of Westford. So here's the air-based crew on the rail extra coming through the bleachery in Lowell.
Where's the well-drill?
This was, I did not get that. I'm going to presume, well, actually, I do know it was from L.B. Foster. I don't know where L.B. Foster had produced it from. Someplace probably in the Rust Belt.
They're using the well-to-rail plant in Billerica anymore?
Not that I know of. Rail train coming up to Lowell Junction in Andover. And as much as I hate shooting with overcast skies, I couldn't help but take advantage of the overcast skies and get this shot. Rail train through Lawrence, from the Lawrence parking garage. And if you can see the head end of the train on the upper left there, coming up to a stop signal at Frost, CPFFR, where the train would require what's known as a Rule 241, which is permission past a stop signal. And permission past a stop signal can be given for so many different reasons, but you could have a broken bulb, so the signal is unable to display permissive. Could have a track circuit in front, so it can't display a signal. Could be a number of different reasons. Back to commuter territory, we saw that picture from March Street of the inbound. This is from March Street in Salem of an outbound, train 191. And in the background, you got Northey Point interlocking, you can see the signals for, and the city of Salem. 191 at the time, it was a local Boston to Hamilton Wenham. And then it turned as train 192, Hamilton Wenham, back to Boston. NBSR number 100. This is inbound at Manchester by the Sea. Now we talked about the grain train at the opening shot. Well, here's a unit grain train at the milling. Now, a couple of things. We'll stay on this topic here for a couple of minutes. I think there's some information most people would find interesting and like to know. when the milling upgraded, they, of course, now they had the ability to take 2 to 3 unit trains, 100 plus cars a month, in addition to cars that came in manifest. But one thing that was not upgraded was the capacity, the rail capacity on the loop track. You look across the country and Mexico and Canada, and a lot of the grain customers are working with railroads to create loop tracks that will handle entire 100 plus car trains. Obviously at the New England milling, there was not enough real estate to do that. So when grain trains come into air, they have to go over in 2 halves. And this is the first half of the train. And this particular train came off the UP, maybe evident by the former Southern Pacific still painted locomotive. But definitely not that you can see it in the pictures because you can't, but they are UP cars. Now I did bring a couple of props with me here. The other customer that's on the milling loop track is Catania Spagna, one of the largest food oil producers in the Northeast. And you know, we think of railroads, a lot of people think of a railroad as just something that it's a nuisance. And besides us in here who actively like trains and like to know about them, and myself working for the railroad, you know, you're directly affected by it. Most people really aren't able to relate to railroads in their lives. But Catania Spagna, if you go to Market Basket, Catania Spagna produces Marconi extra virgin olive oil. So this stuff would come in by rail, and they would produce it. And the milling, at this time it was Horizon Milling, but after this would be called Ardent Mills. They produce flour for bakeries, restaurants. Every once in a while, I shop at the Littleton, Mass. Market Basket. Every once in a while, you'll see Ardent Mill flour for sale. So simple things like that we're all tied in on the railroad in our daily lives. Eastbound EDPO, East Deerfield to Portland, coming through the Bleachery in Lowell. And something you're going to probably be seeing less and less of as the years go on, but a Boston and Maine boxcar, en route back up to the, hopefully back up to the paper mills for some more paper. It was amazing when working there to see the amount of storage cars, storage boxcars that they had, whether it was up in Waterville, the number 2 main line in Benton, just east of Waterville. Never made a meet there because the entire number 2 track was doused in storage cars like these. And I know after they announced the deal to be acquired by CSX, they took a lot of those cars off of that number 2 track and scrapped them. There was a scrapper in Oakland that would sell them, that would buy them from the railroad. And to be honest too, you know, this is a Plate C boxcar. You're seeing, I mean, there'll always be a need for a Plate C boxcar, but as the railroad and companies that use the railroad try to get more efficient, you're going to see, in my opinion, less and less of them over time.
And Plate C refers to what?
The size of the car. I mean, to the right of the boxcar, you see an F box, a Plate F, which holds even more product. So, even though you might get less carloads, you can ship more product. Westbound POED, coming over Gorham Street in Lowell, yep. Back to Mystic Junction here in Somerville. Got a NBSR inbound. Mystic Junction was 1.5 miles outside of North Station. Couple of things about this photo to talk to you guys about. If you were to get up on Crossroad, which is where I'm standing, looking at this view today, it would be vastly different. Yard 8 off to the right, that's all gone. That's now all Green Line for the Green Line extension up to Tufts University. So there'd be wires and everything. You see the automatic signals. The one that is facing us, that would be the distant signal for Tower A, and the one that's not facing us is the distant to Somerville Junction. Those are all gone. The MBTA spent money to upgrade the signal system on the New Hampshire road. It's now all cab, no wayside. So very different scene from today, from when this picture was taken. And Amtrak Downeaster, this is 685. This is I believe it's a 5 o'clock, maybe a little after 5 o'clock outbound out of North Station. Now the very next day, that night I worked third trick, and District 1, Amtrak crews will call you to open up under the mountain branch at Portland, and you get their crew and equipment. And I knew when they gave me the equipment, I knew they had this Amtrak Heritage unit, the 822, as part of their consist. And instead of going home and going to bed like I probably should have, I went to Haverhill. And this is 691 coming into Haverhill, as seen from the parking garage. Eastbound EDPO, tied down at the Lowell. A couple of GP40 high hoods for power. But I wasn't, as much as I look back on this now and I love seeing the high hoods, I wasn't there to really take a picture of the high hoods for power. It's that third unit, the Maine Eastern F unit. So for those that might not have known, the Maine Eastern was owned by the Morristown and Erie Railroad. And even though the Rockland branch, there was a locomotive facility, still is a locomotive facility up in Rockland, all the heavy stuff was done on the Morristown and Erie in New Jersey. And this was coming from the Morristown and Erie, headed back to home base up in Rockland.
That branch may have the trains this coming summer.
Yes, yeah. I know the Mid-Coast, owned by the Finger Lakes, they're in active discussions with Amtrak to meet them in Brunswick, talking about 2 to 3 round trips. So we'll see what they might be able to provide.
I wrote that once, trying to FL9.
Westbound AYMO, air to Mohawk, coming through Derby Curve in Leominster. And you got the NS Monongahela Heritage Unit leading. When Pan Am Southern started, one of the biggest things Norfolk Southern wanted to do was increase auto traffic and intermodal traffic in the greater Boston area. And they certainly did that when they first started. AYMO and its counterpart, MOAY, were both auto and intermodal trains. You'd see both kinds of traffic on the trains. Shortly after this picture, the traffic had become so much that they made their own separate trains. So there were, instead of one train in each direction, there were two trains in each direction. One each for autos and one each for intermodal. And obviously also that came with NS train names as well. So for the longest time we were calling them 23K, which is what the westbound was, and 22K, which is what the eastbound was. Don't ask me the significance for the NS symbols, I have absolutely no idea. The night before this picture was taken, was working third trick in District 1, where I handled this empty oil train from Benton, Maine, and by the time I was relieved, it was coming through New Gloucester, Maine. And I knew they were going to continue the train west. Went home, went to bed, woke up, called Mike Moretto on District 2. He was the last B&M train dispatcher working for Pan Am at the time. And hey, where's that oil train? Oh, it's coming through Lawrence. All right, thank you. And here we see that empty oil train coming through the bleachery. Got a westbound POED coming up to Haverhill. Here is seen from the parking garage again. Slowing down for the 5-mile-an-hour speed restriction over the Merrimack River Bridge. All the districts on Pan Am were unique. They had their own separate nuances. I like District 2 the most because it was the simplest, but it was also fun. But the biggest thorn in anybody's side was moving a mile, maybe even greater long freight train over the 5-mile-an-hour Merrimack River Bridge, especially during a weekday where you had a morning commuter rush and an evening commuter rush. But this was a weekend, so no need to worry about delaying any commuter trains on the commuter rush this day. But this POED might look insignificant to most people. For me, though, it's a huge memory because of that second car on the train. You know, most of the times when they ran loads of nuclear waste out of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, they got its own separate train. But for whatever reason, the night before this, we ran a DO Extra that got the load of nuclear waste from Kittery, ran it up to Rigby and Portland. They came on to my territory, District 1, to Wyatt in the old Yard 8. Went back to the west end of Rigby and put it on the head pin of this POED. And I remember seeing a transportation notice and waybill for it, where it was going to this place in Idaho. And I remember Googling the place in Idaho, and no such place existed. But yeah.
By the way, Santa Fe used to do that with Los Alamos when we were inventing that famous bomb of ours.
And the POED had a set-off in Lawrence, and combined that with a 5-mile-an-hour speed restriction over the Merrimack River, made it easy to get down to Lawrence. See him trek his way into the yard. So behind the load of nuclear waste, about 16 cars behind, was his Lawrence set-off. And a part of that Lawrence set-off were a string of loads of carbon dioxide coming out of St. John, Praxair, Canada, going to their facility in Tewksbury. Empty oil train coming through Shirley. There was, when we started running these trains with the power up to Mattawamkeag, there was a long-time Maine Central Pan Am engineer. All he had known and seen in his life were, Maine Central engines and ratty Guilford engines. And when he got on, he got off a loaded oil train after delivering it up a keg, and he called me up like a little kid in a candy store. Nate, do you think you might be able to call Tim Mellon and try to get him to buy us some of these? And I said, let me see what I can do. Yeah, it didn't.
Guaranteed.
Another empty oil train, same spot, different day at Shirley. BNSF Pumpkin and a couple of the cream and green units.
You've got SD70 Max.
Working First Trick District 2 on a weekend. Rigby did not have a POED train available for the crew that was to handle POED. But luckily for us, there was an empty oil train that was headed west. And we put them on the empty oil train. Believe it was Allen Ave in Portland, CPF 194. And they ended up taking it west. And I ended up handling the train, gave them permission over the Merrimack River Bridge. And that was right at transfer time. Did my transfer and scooted on over here to Andover. And here's that empty oil train coming through Andover. And you can see it wasn't in service at the time. It is in service now, the new number 1 track. A detoured unit ethanol train coming through Shirley. I forget the reason for the detour, but it was necessary to get this ethanol from the Midwest to the Providence and Worcester to bring it down to Motiva Enterprises in Providence. And instead of taking the right-hand turn at Gardner, they took the right-hand turn at Air and down the Worcester main line. Westbound SJPO, St. John to Portland, on the last of its trek coming through Mountain Junction, we called CPF 196. Control point, freight main line, 196 was the associated mileage with the interlocking. The SJPOs were hot trains. And we were late getting into Waterville with it the night before, and the crew got a late start. And because it was so hot, they ended up putting the DJ1 crew, the Anvil Junction crew, on to finish it off in Portland. Now, it was so hot to get it to Portland, but Rigby couldn't handle it. So they ended up tying the train down at Rigby. Here we are, just from the Route 1 overhead bridge at the east end of Rigby Yard. And on the right is the SJPO tying down. And they would bring 2 engines into the yard. They leave one as a pumper, a term I was not familiar with until coming onto the railroad. And you'd leave a pumper on to continue pumping air into the train. After 4 hours, you'd have to retest it, which that was a mess and a half. So you tried not to, you didn't want to retest the train if you could help it. And while waiting for the SJPO to tie down, the District 1 dispatcher let Switcher 3, PO3, out of the yard. with a slug of empty tanks to go to yard 6, the oil plant, where they would pick up, the tanks would get filled with limestone slurry, coming in by ship to go up to the Maine paper mills. Yeah, who can do a program without having a Sperry truck in it, Sperry car in it? Prior to working on the railroad, I always thought these ran like a regular train. Sperry cars, Sperry trucks are treated like track cars. You need, regardless whether it's dark territory or signaled territory, you need what's known as a Form D Line 2, which is your authority to occupy said track. And you need a Line 3, which tells you trains or track cars ahead. And this is a Sperry truck, Sperry car, westbound on the WNNP, crossing under the old New Haven and Clinton. And I had nothing better to do this day, so why not chase the Sperry car? Got down to Worcester. I was going to head off to the P&W, and the P&W dispatcher, before taking the Sperry car, took their GRWO, Gardner to Worcester job, with a slug of traffic from the interchange up in Gardner. The Pan Am Southern interchange in Gardner prior to NS, it was relatively dry. Maybe a coal train to Mount Tom, couple other loads of this and that. Norfolk Southern has really brought in a lot of that traffic, autos and other manifest, into Gardner. And then the Sperry car following it. This is Barber in Worcester. Now we're into 2013. A couple important things happened in 2013. Prior to 2013, Guilford dispatchers were management. We were TOMs. And starting in 2013, we became union, and which mean we could, I was qualified in District 1 and District 2 at the time, and I was senior to a couple of people, and I ended up bumping, instead of choosing District 1, I bumped onto a third trick District 2 job. And after working a third trick District 2, where I had to call a cab for a Lawrence crew at the shop to bring them back to Lawrence, I got off of work and drove back, and here's the picture of the Lawrence LA3 power tied down at Billerica shop. When most people think of Billerica shop, rightfully they think, historically, the B&M shops that were there. Obviously, not an ounce of mechanical work is done there today, but it's not all bare from railroad operations. There's quite a few customers within the Billerica shop or have spurs that come from the shop. And the track in the foreground is for Larson's, which was a transload. They would usually get cars of lumber and steel beams. For a long time, Larson's was also getting loads of granite that were going to the Fletcher Quarry in Westford. The Fletcher Quarry in Westford has a special cutter, stone cutter, where they get stone from across the country from their granite places across the country to cut. Also out of the shop, Siegel Egg. If you guys see their trucks on 495, Siegel Egg does stuff for the baking industry up here. Loads of flour, loads of butter, loads of sugar come in by rail. SEPO tied down at the Lowell Tower. Now, some people might say, well, it's just a SEPO on a crummy morning. Well, yes, but a couple important things about this SEPO. About a month or so little over a month before this picture was taken, the Federal Railroad Administration condemned the MBTA bridge over the Charles River on the Grand Junction running track. And for those that might be unfamiliar with the Grand Junction running track, it is it really is an artery for the north side and the south side. It's an artery for the Amtrak equipment for the Downeaster to go to Southampton Street and for them to exchange good equipment for equipment that's due. But it was also a way for CSX to service their customers in Everett. And one of the customers that they had in Everett was the New England Produce Center, which was never a Boston or Maine customer. It was always a B&A, New York Central, Conrail CSX customer. And this was the first time, instead of, they still needed to be served. So because of the condemning the bridge, CSX handed over the traffic to Pan Am. So again, tying it back to our daily livelihoods here, I got a couple of bags of potatoes, Chelsea Creek Farms that you can pick up at Market Basket, and onions. They say Market Basket on them, but distributed by JJR Distributing, Chelsea, Mass. So,
What kind of traffic is going there, volume-wise?
I haven't worked a job recently where I've had to deal with them, but I know they get quite a few cars in a given day. Talked about Plate C and Plate F cars before. I mean, these are Plate Cs, obviously, but they've transferred out from doing Plate Cs to doing Plate Fs. So again, more traffic, but less cars.
Is that bridge still condemned?
Oh no. Part of my territory on the terminal is the Grand Junction, and that's been just fine for the time being.
Someday they have commuter trains.
I'll believe that when it happens. Yeah.
I can remember when I worked for the Trick at RH, there would be peak season for whatever vegetables. There'd be 2 40-car trains. Mm-hmm. Go over, get the empties out, load them up with 40 more, come back, 40 more on one shift.
Yep.
Hey,
I don't think
Nathaniel,
that's wise.
do they make Amtrak, do they make their moves at night?
Usually, Amtrak will tack on some equipment on the tail end of their last train out of Brunswick, 688, and they'll bring it into North Station and on 688, and they'll detach and they'll make their So it is at night. I mean, obviously, you're not in the way of the commuter rush. Easier to get to and from.
Back in service, did they get the...
CSX did get the traffic back. And then a couple of years ago, they had a deal, before CSX bought Pan Am, CSX gave Pan Am all the traffic in exchange for trackage rights on the WNNP up to air. Late 2012, Pan Am sold the Calais running track to the NBSR, an interesting piece of railroad on Pan Am, which was up in Woodland, serviced the paper mill up in Woodland. But the only way to get to it was going over and through Canada and back around St. Croix Junction. But when they sold it to the NBSR, they had to get everything that was not a part of the sale off of the line. And one of those things was this Maine Central plow. And this particular night, I handled this plow was on the tail end of a POED out of Rigby. We set it off here in Lowell for the Nashua local to come down and get. Local LA 5 tied down at the Lowell Tower, waiting for the morning crew to bring the train to the shop. Westbound POED coming through the bleachery. Spin you a quick story here. The night this had happened, this POED was tied down at Atkinson, New Hampshire. The recrew that was planned to take it, it was a Deerfield crew. They weren't qualified east of Tewksbury. So we used them for something else. There was no plans to run this POED out of Atkinson. Day shift will handle it in the morning. That night we had an 0200 crew at Worcester to handle the train from CSX. We had an 0100 crew out of Rigby to handle POSE. Crew comes on at 1 o'clock. They're out in good season about 2 o'clock, moving west. Everything's going good. Crew comes on at 2 o'clock at Worcester, waiting for the CSX train to come. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, the chief gets a call from his counterpart in Selkirk and says, yeah, we're going to be about 12 hours late to Worcester. Okay. Because of that, we're going to send you the POSE first. And the CSX chief says, well, I'm sorry to tell you this again. I have to hand you your SEPO first. I cannot take that POSE. So it was back to the drawing board in Billerica. So there was no sense of pushing this POSE west when it was going to rot someplace in Lowell or in Graniteville. So I decided to tie the posy down at Atkinson and take the crew, which was qualified to Deerfield, and handle the POED west. And here's that POED again coming through Lowell. They made it as far as Farley in Irving, where the yard, Deerfield yard, ended up having a local crew come out and pull it in. So just to, anything can change at a given time. An extra CSX 703 eastbound on the Worcester main line. CSX had given us an extra train this night, and the extra was for a new MBTA Rodham coach to be delivered. And here it is coming through Still River, crossing over the Nashua River in Harvard. Loaded coal train getting tied down at Farley. Crew that was only good till 8 o'clock. Crews can only work for 12 hours. This is about 7:30 in the morning, so they didn't have enough time to make it much place else. So they tied it down at Farley. The NS Wabash Heritage Unit on the head end. And they did end up getting a crew for it. Not the world's greatest picture, but coming through Willows East in Littleton during a snowstorm. Now this night, I showed up to work 3rd Trick District 2, and I think it was about 30 cars of this train was on the ground in Nashua. Absolutely tore the track up. And because of that, it required the Pan Am wreck train. Again, not another great picture, but more of a memory for me. Wreck train eastbound in Westford. And the big hook, part of the wreck.
Where did that come from? Deerfield?
Deerfield, yep. Local NA1 on the Hillsborough branch. The other thing about railroads and dispatching, if you look at a map, Nashua is east of Milford. Milford is west of Nashua. To a general person with any common sense, but on the railroad, there's sometimes not common sense. And according to our timetable and special instructions, the Hillsborough branch is north-south. So this train is headed north, and they're seen crossing Railroad Pond in Milford.
Kind of like East Northfield, which is west of Northfield.
Yeah, right.
What do you think of the track condition on that Hillsborough branch?
I would compare them with the track conditions on the Madison branch, where the Madison branch, 20 miles of 5 miles an hour, you gave a Form D to that train, and if you heard from that train within 4 hours, there was a 100% chance they were calling to tell you they were on the ground. The Hillsborough branch, maybe less time, but the same scenario. Except the only difference on the Hillsborough, there was a mile, everything was 5 miles an hour, except there was a golden mile of 10. Yeah. Downeaster 684 blasting through Ward Hill. An empty limestone train, LBOPW, tied down at Graniteville. The P&W at the time were releasing a pair of GATX SD60s, and they definitely made many trips up the Bow and on Pan Am over the time. Eastbound EDPO tied down at the Lowell Tower. Some leased units. Mr. Nixis, do you remember this?
Yes.
Okay. Trip with Mr. Nixis and Mr. Winiars up to District 1. And tried my hardest not to call the office. Wanted to try to rail fan up there without the need to call in and look for help. But, well, what can I say? We needed help. And called District 1 and talked to Candy Pateris, who said, well, there's a PORU is just around Danville. We said, great. And here's this PORU, Portland to Rumford, crossing the Androscoggin from Auburn into Lewiston. Now, we decided to chase the PORU, and in the middle of our chase, I ended up getting a call from the office. Gary Muncie had relieved Candy and said, Nate, I understand you're chasing PORU. Yes, I am. Well, Nate, PORU does not have telemetry. I need an ID. Dark territory dispatchers cannot see where trains are at any given point. And they rely on people out in the field to physically see the tail end of the train with a marker. Or they rely on trains with telemetry, which means the head end is communicating with the tail end and the end of train device. But when you don't have telemetry, a train cannot call clear for themselves. You have to see the tail end. So after getting a call clear for Mr. Muncie at Leeds Junction, we headed up the Rumford branch, and this is the PORU coming through Libby's Pit in Leeds. Same train at Curtis Corner, also in Leeds. Crossing the Dead River. That switch out to Costers, the egg farm on the railroad. We refer to this as switching the chickens. Now we talked about earlier train lengths. This PORU was in good shape for the day. What was not in good shape was RUPO. They were laid out of Rumford, massive train out of Rumford, going to be even bigger out of Riley's. And to get the flow of traffic back on time, PORU was small enough to do a meet at Strickland's, which could probably handle about 20-25 car lengths. So again, needing to know your footage. So here's the PORU making a run for Strickland's to do the meet with Rupo, passing, this is Route 106 in Leeds. And then that RUPO after the meet. Those brand new MBTA Rotom cars started to come for delivery quicker. And the night before this was taken, 2 came in at Rotterdam Junction, New York. And Pan Am found a crew to handle it east. And shockingly, the Rotterdam Junction crew was qualified all the way to Air. And from Air, they put on an AY local crew to handle it to Boston. And what usual with me, probably taking train pictures, I find a great spot with great sun. And just before the train shows up, the clouds come in. But here's the Rotterdam Extra headed inbound on the Fitchburg route to deliver a few more brand new Rotoms. I think the rail fan community, definitely the people that work for Pan Am as well, were surprised when Pan Am decided to run the High Iron Excursion, supposed to be a one-way, one-day trip from Boston to Mechanicville via the New Hampshire route. And the day it was running, I was dispatching District 2, so I wasn't going to get a chance to photograph it. I was going to dispatch it. And it was supposed to deadhead in the night before. But I got a call from work that it was going to deadhead earlier into Boston. And even though it was raining, ran right down to Silver Hill in Weston on the Fitchburg route. Here they are coming Boston bound. Due to a derailment on the Hillsborough branch, the Nashua job fell down for the week for what it was looking to complete. And Friday night, the NA1 crew finished up at Wilton. There wasn't going to be another Nashua crew on duty until 7 a.m. It was 7 a.m. on Sunday night. And Pan Am didn't want that, so they called the Nashua Extra 0800 to taxi to Wilton and get the train. So here's the Nashua Extra. They're going to bury the dangerous empty residue, I believe it's sodium hydroxide. Is that Wilton? And once they buried the dangerous and got their train together, they headed timetable south back to Nashua. And you can imagine at 5 miles an hour is a pretty simple chase. Here it is coming up on Old Nashua Road along Route 101A in Amherst. About to duck under Fairmount Street in Nashua. And coming into the yard limit, milepost I-1 in Nashua. And this is where I had to sign off. I had to work Second District 2 this day. Went home, dropped off the dog, had a quick lunch, went to work. And by the time I got to work, this crew had gone to Nashua, got more empty Deerfield traffic, and made its way down to Lowell. And they called me from Lowell saying they needed a taxi. I said, sure. And the crew knew I had been out taking pictures of them. And the engineer said to his conductor, hey, John, do you think it would be possible that we can go to Billerica and take pictures of the train dispatchers after we're done here? Knowing full well I heard him on the radio. I certainly got a good laugh out of that. The Rodham coaches had arrived at the MBTA, had done their testing on them, and they did a dog and pony show, if you will, for the first ones to be in revenue service. And on an outbound here, leaving Lawrence, they did a dog and pony show in Boston, and when the train gets to Haverhill, they would do another dog and pony show. And they got the MP36, the 011, leading the way. We're getting close on time here. Hey, Jesus. How about 5 more? I don't want to keep.
Put in 10 more.
Okay, I don't want to. I could probably go all day here. Jeez. Now the Downeaster usually, obviously, takes the Wildcat, New Hampshire route to and from Boston. But this weekend there was track work on the New Hampshire route. Downeaster had to be diverted to the western route. And here's 695 coming through Melrose, Cedar Highlands, crossing over West Emerson. And 696 crossing over the Mystic River, almost to Boston. Seen from the Wellington parking garage. A POSE at Ward Hill. EDPO coming through the Willows. But the thing with this EDPO, anybody can go out and shoot an EDPO. The thing was on the tail end, where Pan Am decided to grow its office car fleet. And they bought this former Wabash dome car. And if you look closely on it, you can see Wabash written up at the top, and headed up to Waterville to be refurbished. So even though I got plenty more, I know, like Mal had said, maybe some questions or stuff. So I guess we'll end with that.
Well, okay. I think we had a very nice. Can we hear a little bit? Thank you very much. Do we have some questions for Nate? Any questions? Well, I've got one question. I warned him about it. Do you have any, what would your comments be about that infamous wreck in East Palestine, Ohio?
From a dispatching perspective, obviously a worst nightmare. It's probably an understatement. But just to realize, railroading is an outdoor sport. Things happen. Humans make mistakes. We'll find out with the NTSB investigation of what had happened. Things can happen. As much as I hate to say it.
Could have happened a million other places except the middle of that village, right? All right. You wanted to have a few moments?
For a second.
Just a few moments, please.
Yeah, Wayne Slaughter, I do the mileage notes. Some of you know Jim before. He has a beautiful Cheshire branch, HO Railroad. He's invited B&M Society members for an open house. It'll be this Sunday next.
The 16th.
The 16th. I got to some of you through email, but I don't have everybody's email. So anybody here that hadn't heard about it that wants to go, I have some flyers here, and you'll be able to email you. From that, you can email me back, and then I can give you the directions and note that you're going to come. We have a limit of about 12 people just because of the size of the basement. Well, we're getting close to full. But anybody that's hadn't heard of it, you've seen it in maybe it was it Great Mountain Railroads or layout planning last year, and he was in the Prototype Modeler magazine a few years ago. But a lot of you know him. But beautiful layout. So very accurate rendition of the Cheshire branch in the late 40s.
Some of us in this room have been there already.
Sure you have, yeah. Right. Yep. So anyway, Anybody wants a flyer, I have some over here.
I'll pick one up, thank you. So, hey, thanks for Nate.
Thanks for having me.